Welcome to chapter 11 of the book of Leviticus, laws regarding unclean animals. The chapter is basically divided into two sections. One is eating these unclean and clean animals, and the second is touching. The first part here is on eating, and it begins, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, speak to them, these are the animals which you shall eat from all of the animals upon the earth. Now, earth here, it could be ground or land. It just depends on the context. The snake slithers upon the ground. You could say it slithers upon the earth also. The earth is a planet Earth, and so depends on the context. But now here's what they can eat. So God is going to put these dietary rules of what can and can't be eaten. It says every animal being cloven hoof. Now, a cloven hoof, well, I have a picture, is right here. I think this is a roebuck. You can see, now each of these are called claws. I don't know, right and the left claw, the center, the inside, the outside claw. And this is a cleft. It's called the cleft. And so it had to have two claws, clawing with two claws. Didn't have three. Some animals have three, and I'm not sure which ones they were. But every animal being cloven-hoofed, cleft, and cloven-footed, clawing with two claws. And clawing is when they go like this with their hoof, and they dig into the ground, and that's clawing. Now, a lot of animals claw. Cats claw, dogs claw. Other animals, alligators claw in the sand and so forth, but they have to have the two claws, and it takes up eating or chewing the cud among the animals. These you shall eat. Now, chewing the cud is called a rumination, a ruminant animal, and it's named after the rumen, which is a sac in the stomach that humans don't have, that it pre-digests the food, and then it'll come back up into the mouth, and they can chew it again the second time. So they're chewing the cud. That's what it's called. Now, the animals that chew the cud will go in here, and we'll see it, that some are fit the bill and others don't. And then it says, except from these you shall not eat, from the ones taking up chewing the cud, and of the ones not being cloven of the hoofs, and clawing, cloven-footed. And the camel, the giraffe, it doesn't say giraffe here, but the horse, rhinoceros, hippopotamus, these are all animals that they're not cloven. They have hoofs, but like the horse is one giant hoof. And the camel, for this one takes up chewing the cud, and the hoof is not cloven. This one is unclean to you. Now, I'm trying to think of cattle, and I guess I'm not a farmer or a rancher, and so I'm not really too positive on these different animals. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this, you out there, would know exactly, and you'd say, well, that guy's really a city slicker. He doesn't know anything. Yeah, you're right. And and then it goes on, and it says, and the dasypoda, that's a hare, like a rabbit. For this one takes up chewing the cud, and its hoof is not cloven, so it doesn't have it. This one is unclean to you. And the hyrax I think that's sort of like a rabbit type of an animal, I believe. For this one does not take up chewing the cud, and the hoof is not cloven. This one is unclean to you. So there's a lot of animals that don't do either one. They're not cloven. They don't chew the cud. We'll get into all the mammals, the four-footed. Here it has the pig. For this one is cloven of hoof, and he claws with the claw of the hoof, but this one does not take up chewing the cud. This is unclean to you. So these are all the different animals. Ones that aren't cloven and don't chew the cud would be like dogs and cats and so forth. So does that mean we can't eat dogs and cats? No, that means these people here couldn't eat dogs and cats. But if we go into the New Testament, we see in Acts 10:9, Peter going upstairs at the hour of prayer. And the next day, as those are journeying and approaching the city, that's the one from Cornelius the centurion, who sees a vision of an angel and tells him to go look for Peter. And he sends these officers or soldiers out, and they come. Peter's staying with Simon the tanner. So it says, so while this was happening, Peter ascended upon the roof to pray around the 6th hour. And a lot of these buildings there at that time have flat roofs with maybe 2 or 3 foot edge so you wouldn't fall off. And people could lay up there and read and do all kinds of things, and here he would pray. And he became hungry, and he wanted to taste. But as those were making preparations down below for food, there fell upon him a change of state. And he viewed the heaven being opened, and descending unto him a certain item as a great piece of cloth, the 4 corners being tied and being lowered unto the earth. So here's this cloth coming down, the 4 tied, I guess, to somehow, they may have been tied together, or it may have been 4 ropes, doesn't exactly say, but in which were all the 4-footed creatures of the earth, all, and the wild beasts, and the reptiles, and the birds of the heaven. So now we have all these animals, and there came a voice to him, Rise up, Peter, sacrifice and eat, or slay and eat. And Peter said, By no means, O Lord, for at no time I ate anything common or unclean. And a voice again from the second time came to him, What God cleansed, you are not to make unclean. So God cleansed all these animals of the earth, the ghee, and we can eat any animal. And so can a Jew, if they so choose to become Christians and not follow the things of the Jews. They can still follow the things of the Jews and not eat them too. It's their choice, I suppose. Now, does that mean it's okay for me to go out and eat Lassie or Garfield, a cat or a dog? Well, I've grown up with the Bible, and I've grown up with what's clean and what's not clean, and it's definitely affected my psyche. And in the United States, there's just certain animals people don't eat. They don't eat dogs, they don't eat cats, and very seldom do they eat horses. They don't eat rats, where all these animals are eaten in other places. The horses are all over. I'm sure that I've probably been to Mexico, and I probably had horse meat and didn't know it. The Asia, the countries in Asia, I've read where they eat dog meat, and then later we'll go on to the different types of life that's in the ocean, and in Asia they love to eat the seafood that's not fish. Could be squid, could be oysters, all sorts of octopus. Yeah, I had octopus, and then when I went to the island of Patmos in Greece and stayed at the monastery of St. John the Theologian, never had it before, and had it in my plate. It was during Lent, and the abbot apologized that they didn't have their normal good food, and so I had my share of octopus. I worked for 3 months, had a job from hell in a oyster farm with 5 women in a kitchen, and it wasn't a lot of fun. And I was sorting oysters. They had shuckers. I should have been a shucker. It would have been better than working in the kitchen with all the ladies and separating these oysters into 4 different sizes: large, extra large, medium, and petite. And they would put them in little plastic buckets and sell it and take it to the stores and so forth. Yaquina oyster farm. And so these people would come in and get them, and they'd eat them raw. They would put different kinds of seasoning or flavoring on them, with like a horseradish ketchup and lime juice, and mix it up and have these little petites and then swallow them down. But yeah, I ate one of his, like, ugh, I don't like oysters. I very rarely will eat any of the seafood that was considered unclean at this time. And where I live in Newport, Oregon, it's right on the ocean, of course, Newport, and they have a lot of crab meat here, and people love crab meat. But generally, if I'm offered it, I don't eat it. And the same thing with shrimp. They have a lot of shrimp, and I basically don't eat that. What I really love is ling cod. Oh boy, ling cod, is it so good? It's a white fish. It's got fish, and we'll go in there. It's a clean fish, Levitically clean. Oh, and they're long. Oh gosh, they could probably be this long, and they're that big around, and the bone, and it's right in the center, and it goes down, and you have 2 big, huge sections that are like this long, and you cut all the way down, and you'll have on both sides, you'll have a piece of the best tasting fish. Ling cod is this big around and about 1 foot long. 2 of them. Oh, it is really good. And salmon, we have a lot of salmon here, and I love to eat salmon, and they are unclean. But we'll get into that here as we go down. And then it continues, of their meats you shall not eat, and of the meats of their decaying flesh you shall not touch. These are unclean to you. Now, they can't eat them, and they can't touch the decaying flesh of them. It doesn't mean they can't touch an unclean animal like a dog or a donkey or a horse. I mean, they use them for riding. Dogs were running around, and so they were able to touch them, but not the decaying flesh of them. That's a different thing. So that's what it's talking about here. It's a differentiation. These are unclean to you. And these you shall eat out of all of the ones in the waters, all as many as there are fins to them and scales being in the waters. And that was that ling cod, salmon. They had scales. They had to scrape all the scales off, and then they had fins sticking out, which would guide them. Being in the waters and in the seas and in the rushing streams, these you shall eat. And all as many as there are not fins to them, nor scales, like the in the water would be any of the mammals, but in the fish family would be like squid, octopus, shark, the bottom feeders, basically, that don't have scales. They just have skin, and being in the waters and in the seas and in the rushing streams, of all which bubble the waters. And bubble, it's an interesting word to use, a descriptive word, bubbling. Bubble, up the little bubbles, air bubbles go up. And from every soul living in the water, it is an abomination. And they shall be abominations to you. You shall not eat of their meats. And their decaying flesh you shall abhor. So even the unclean animals, you're to abhor the decaying flesh. Reminds me of my son was, we were like 12, he was like 10 or 12 years old. We were going driving on the Salton Sea, which is like the Dead Sea. It's below sea level. It's all salt. There are fish that live in it, but they have problems with it. And at this time when we were driving, they had a tremendous amount of these fish died, and I don't know why, but they were all along the edge of the beach. And my son, we had an ocean. I had an ocean-going sailboat, and we go in the ocean and sail. And I put the rods in the trunk. So if we were driving by, I told my son, I said, Charlie, go grab the rods. Grab a rod out of the trunk. So he goes and grabs a rod out of the trunk, and so he put like 15 of these fish where his fishing pole was bent over, and he has his grin on his face. It was just precious because he knew this whole thing was a joke. It's probably the first time he ever did any kind of joke like that, or a practical joke, whatever you want to call it. And I took a picture of him and showed people of all the fish that he caught. But so that would have been something, if you were a Jew and at this time, you wouldn't do. In all, as many as there are not fins to them, nor scales of the ones in the water, this is an abomination to you. And these you shall abhor from, and then that's the end of that. Now, and these you shall abhor from the winged creatures. Petinon, the peta, have a helicopter pater with the wing, shall not be eaten. It is an abomination. Now, these different birds. Now, generally, the animals that it's okay to eat, as far as what I eat, would be game birds like pheasant, turkey, chickens, what do they call them? Chuckers, quail, birds like that. But it says the vulture, the kite, and the ones likened to it, and all the crows, and the ones likened to it, and the ostrich. Now, ostriches, they do eat. I think in Australia they have ostrich, and that they sell the meat. And there was one restaurant when I was growing up, Southern California, that had ostrich meat and didn't tell anybody, and got big trouble, made it into hamburger. But the owl, the gull. Now, all these names, dictionary says this is what the bird is. I don't know from the Greek word if that's ones or some may be off, and maybe a little bit something different. I don't know. And the ones likened to it, and the hawk, and the ones likened to it, the long-eared owl, and the cormorant, and the avine. Now, ibis, avine comes from avis. You can add that to your English derivatives book. That is a transliteration. And the purple-legged stork. We have porphyry. The porphyra is purple. Here's another one you can add. Pelicana, pelican. That's the one that has that big beak and big, huge sac. And the swan, the heron, the curlew, and the ones likened to it. The hoopoe and the bat, which isn't really a bird. And all the crawling things of the winged creatures which go upon fours. It is an abomination to you. And I'm not exactly I'm trying to think. A crawling creature had wings which go upon four. Well, I'm not sure what that would be. But these you shall eat from the crawling things of the winged creatures which go upon fours, which have legs upward from their feet. I suppose to spring up with them upon the earth. And you shall eat these from them, the grasshopper and the ones likened to it, the hopping locust and the ones likened to it, the crawling locust and the ones likened to it, and the locust and the ones likened to it. Now, it says in the New Testament that John, the one immersing, the Baptist, he ate locusts and wild honey. Now, when I was a kid, they mentioned eating locusts, and when St. Louis, Missouri, eating a locust. And a locust came around during the summertime, was a pest, hopped around, and eating those things, you'd think, it'd be disgusting. So they try to say it wasn't real locust; it was locust bread, something that he was eating, and they changed it. But it isn't. They eat locusts, and I've talked to people who go to the Middle East, and they fry them crispy and put salt on them, and they say they're excellent. And like Cheetos or something, Fritos, and why not? So if you get over there, let me know how you like them. If I went over there, I'd try them out. Tried out octopus, so why not locust? And every crawling thing of the winged creatures which are of 4 feet is an abomination to you. And maybe other 4-footed insects that are that the leg doesn't that doesn't go up, spring up with them. They just walk. I don't know, like walking sticks, maybe, so forth. I thought they had 6 legs. Well, and by these you shall be defiled, everyone touching. So now I put there touching, because I should have probably separated it here, because now to touch it, now it's their decaying flesh will be unclean until evening. Now, it doesn't mean you couldn't touch the animal while it's alive, just the decaying flesh. Everyone lifting their decaying flesh shall wash their garments and shall be unclean until evening. Now, some of it was eaten. Game that was killed by another animal and somebody saw it, like a lion killed a deer, then they could go take it and go home and eat it, but it would pick it up. They would be unclean, but they could do it. And among all the animals which are cloven hoof and with cloven footed claws and chewing of the cud, does not chew the cud, they shall be unclean to you. So the dead flesh it's unclean, so until evening. Now, if you're hungry, I'm sure you would eat it, cook it, and then be unclean. And so, well, you're unclean till evening. Everyone touching their decaying flesh will be unclean until evening. And everyone which goes upon his hands among all the wild beasts which go upon 4s, it is unclean to you. Dogs, cats, and all these, alligators. Everyone touching of their decaying flesh will be unclean until evening. And the one lifting of their decaying flesh shall wash his garments and will be unclean until evening. And these shall be unclean to you. So see here now the decaying flesh, they lifted it. And these are unclean to you of the crawling things, erpatone, herpes, like reptiles, ones crawling upon the earth or the ground. The weasel and the meese, you can add meese to your English derivatives as a transliteration to mouse. And the crocodilos, the crocodile, dryland crocodile, and the one likened to it, and the field mouse, and another one you can add, hameleon, chameleon, and the calavotes, the newt, the lizard, mole. These are unclean to you from all of the crawling things crawling upon the earth. Everyone touching their decaying flesh will be unclean until evening. Now if they're alive, no problem. And all upon whatever should fall upon it, upon their ones having died, shall be unclean from every wooden item. So if you did have something that was unclean and it touched a wooden item or your garment or a skin, dermatos, a derma, it's a skin. Saku, sackcloth, comes from these derivative transliteration. Every item in whichever work should be done by it shall be immersed into water. I have dipped. A dip, it goes under though. The word vapto means to immerse. or to dip. It shall be unclean until evening. So to be baptized or is immersed or dipped. And they dip you, but you go under. It's not sprinkling, it's not pouring. And it shall be unclean until evening, and then it will be clean. So they just wash this stuff, and then it will be clean afterwards. And every earthenware item, that means something that's pottery, into whatever should fall in from them inside, into inside of it, as much as should be inside, it shall be unclean, and it shall be broken. So probably didn't want to use this kind of pots around unclean animals, because you'd have to break it, throw it away. And every food eaten into whatever water from such a container should come upon it will be unclean to you. So if the water was in the unclean vessel, then whatever touched it, it would be unclean. And every potable, a beverage, potable is drinkable. Every beverage which is drunk in any such receptacle, it shall be unclean. And all upon whatever should fall from their decaying flesh upon it, it shall be unclean. Ovens and pots with feet shall be demolished. Now, exactly what it means by demolishing it, I don't know. Break them up. These are unclean, and they shall be unclean to you. Except springs of waters or a well or a gathering of water, it will be clean. So, but the one touching their decaying flesh, it shall be unclean. So if you wash the unclean animal in a well or gathering of water, springs of water, then that water would not be unclean, because it's running water or well, everybody drinks from it. But if the one touching of the decaying flesh shall be unclean. And if anything should fall from their decaying flesh upon any seed fit for sowing, which shall be sown, it shall be clean. So any utensil that has this decaying flesh, and they're using the water to water plants, it's okay. But if water should be poured upon any seed, and their decaying flesh should fall upon it, it is unclean to you. Well, now, if anything should fall from the decaying flesh upon any seed, okay, I guess it's not the water. I think I'm wrong here. So any of this decaying flesh should touch anything that was growing it, but if it's the water, then it would be unclean. So it was the opposite of what I said, sorry. And if one should die of the animals, which this one is allowed for you to eat, the one touching of their decaying flesh will be unclean until evening. And the one eating from their decaying flesh shall wash his garments, and shall be unclean until evening. So they could eat those. And the one lifting of their decaying flesh shall wash his garments, and shall bathe in water, and shall be unclean until evening. And every crawling thing which crawls upon the earth, this is an abomination to you, you shall not eat it. And all going upon the belly, a snake and lizards and so forth, and all going upon fours always, dogs, cats, all the mammals, which is numerous in feet among all the crawling things crawling upon the earth, you shall not eat it, for it is an abomination to you. In no way shall you abhor your souls, defile yourself among all the crawling things crawling upon the earth. And you shall not be defiled by these, and you shall not be unclean by these. For I am Kyrios, Theosimon, your God. And you shall be sanctified, separated by not eating these things, and you shall be then holy. Agii 39. The being sanctified is becoming holy. You shall be holy. It's a preposition, a holy man, but here you will be holy. So it's not an adjective, it's a substantive, a noun substantive. It stands in the place of a noun. For I, the Lord your God, am holy. Another substantive. And you shall not defile your psychos, psychology, psyche, your souls among all the crawling things moving upon the earth. For I am Kyrios, leading you from out of the land of Egypt, to be your God, and you shall be holy, for I, the Lord, am holy. This is the law for the animals, and of the winged creatures, and all life moving in water. Now, it's interesting, it has life moving in water. It doesn't say fish, because there are other animals in the waters that are not fish. And all life crawling upon the earth. To distinguish between the unclean and between the clean, and between the ones bringing forth alive, being alive, the ones being eaten, and between the ones being alive and the ones not being eaten. So, all the things that the Jews could and could not eat are touched. And there are Jews today who still try to obey these laws. They don't have to. And if you're not a Jew, then no problem. There you wouldn't have to anyway, because there are laws for the Jews, not for everybody else. Now, when it gets into commandments and orders and so forth in the New Testament, it gets into Jesus fulfilling the law. And now, Jesus is the perfect sacrifice, a sinless sacrifice. And so what he makes clean is clean. And he did that. It says that read that in Acts. So all these things are now clean. They're not unclean. So you can eat them. So if you live in China and you eat, there's dogs there, then enjoy Fido. And different places, different animals. Now, people that are not used to that it would be abhorrent to eat a dog here in the United States. People care more for their dogs than they do their neighbors a lot of times. See, I see people, I live in a tourist area, I'll see somebody coming down with a baby carriage, and they look kind of like, oh, it's kind of old to have a little child. Maybe and I look and say, oh, is your grandson? I look down inside the baby carriage, and there's a dog sitting there looking at me. And I'm going, oh, I can't believe it. They got to have a dog. They're pushing it down the street in a baby carriage. So people here would have a hard time with doing that. But other places, they eat monkeys in other Philippines, I believe, and rats, and we would go, ooh, yikes. But to them, they like it. Next chapter, chapter 12, hope you'll join us. We find out about the laws regarding childbirth. Until then, God bless.